American scientists are doing something that sounds almost illogical. For years they have deliberately dumped millions of tons of oyster shells back onto the floor of the Chesapeake Bay, in a bay that has been deteriorating for decades. The scene can easily look like a massive act of dumping waste, but in reality it signals something very different: a quiet effort to bring back what once disappeared from these waters. Before dense human development surrounded the bay, oysters formed enormous living reefs. They filtered the water, supported marine life, and kept the entire ecosystem functioning as a stable biological system. So what happened when those oyster reefs vanished, and can pouring mountains of oyster shells back into the water truly help restore an ecosystem that has been damaged for so long? The past, when oysters disappeared. There was a time when the Chesapeake Bay did not need water treatment plants. Before cities densely developed along its shores, massive oyster reefs were capable of filtering the entire bay in just 3 days, a real measurable capacity of a biological system operating at an extraordinary scale. But that system collapsed far faster than most people realize. By 1988, scientists estimated that it would take as long as 325 days for the remaining oysters to filter the same volume of water. The reef structures themselves disappeared as well. In Maryland alone, where oyster reefs once covered roughly 313 square miles, that area had shrunk to just 58 square miles by 2008. The underwater forests that once lifted the ecosystem above the muddy seafloor were replaced by soft, oxygen-depleted sediment. As the reefs vanished, the water grew murkier, habitats disappeared, and an entire chain of ecological balance began to unravel. And that collapse did not come from a single cause. The causes behind the collapse of oyster populations. Take a look at the population density map of the United States. Along the East Coast, 2 areas stand out clearly: the region around New York City and the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, one of the most densely populated areas in the country. When the view expands to the Chesapeake watershed map, the picture becomes even clearer. Washington, Baltimore, Richmond, Arlington, and many other major cities all sit within the same river system, where every stream and river ultimately flows into the bay. This points to a reality that has existed for decades: whatever is discharged on land will sooner or later end up in these waters. Along with wastewater, nitrogen and phosphorus have continuously flowed into the bay. Agriculture is the single largest source. According to data from the Chesapeake Bay Program in 2022, 48% of the nitrogen and 27% of the phosphorus entering the bay originated from agricultural activities. Sewage systems and wastewater treatment plants also play a role. While they are built to meet strict standards, those systems only function reliably under ideal conditions. During heavy rainfall, sewage overflows occur, carrying pollution directly into the bay. In 2021 alone, facilities such as Back River and Patapsco were responsible for 11% of the nitrogen and 15% of the phosphorus entering the Chesapeake Bay. As nitrogen and phosphorus continued to build up, the Chesapeake Bay began to respond in the most dangerous way. Nutrient-rich waters triggered massive algae blooms. From the surface, the bay still looked alive, but below, sunlight could no longer reach the bottom. Underwater plants died off, and as the algae decomposed, oxygen levels dropped rapidly, creating large hypoxic areas known as dead zones. As early as the 1970s, one of the world's first recorded dead zones appeared in the Chesapeake Bay. By 2000, scientists estimated that this process caused the loss of around 75,000 tons of bottom-dwelling organisms each year, undermining the food chain and pushing the ecosystem into long-term decline. However, the Chesapeake Bay was not always this vulnerable. For centuries, oysters functioned as natural water filtration machines, working continuously on the bay floor. A single adult oyster can filter about 50 gallons of water per day. It does this not to clean the environment, but to survive, drawing water in, trapping algae and organic particles as food, then releasing the water back into the bay. When millions or even billions of oysters operate together, entire oyster reefs function like a natural water treatment plant. No electricity, no labor, running non-stop day and night. But oysters do not work alone. As they grow on top of one another, their shells form reefs, rigid, rough ecological infrastructure that lifts life above oxygen-poor MUD. These reefs provide shelter for juvenile fish, blue crabs, crustaceans, and countless bottom-dwelling species. In just half a century, commercial harvesting nearly erased this entire biological system from the Chesapeake Bay, one that had kept these waters alive for hundreds of years. The process of restoring the bay. But what happens if humans try to restore this natural water filtration system? For years, restoration projects have been returning oyster shells to the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. However, simply scattering shells into the water does not automatically create new oysters. Oyster shells and living oysters are two different components, but both play essential roles. Oyster shells are not waste, they are the biological building blocks of oyster reefs. Their primary material is calcium carbonate, exactly what oyster larvae need in order to attach. Oysters cannot grow on smooth, oxygen-poor mud, they require hard, rough surfaces. That is why restoration projects prioritize recycled oyster shells rather than ordinary rock. At the same time, oyster larvae are the living input of the system. After hatching, they are microscopic and drift freely in the water for only a few days. During this brief window, each larva must find a suitable surface to attach to or it disappears. Without the right shells or without larvae, the oyster life cycle breaks and restoration cannot happen. Before any larvae are introduced, oyster shells must go through a strict pre-treatment process. Take the Chesapeake Bay Foundation as an example. Each year, the organization collects around 4,000 bushels of oyster shells from restaurants and individual donors. With an average weight of about 50 pounds per bushel, that adds up to more than 90 tons of material entering the restoration pipeline every year. However, these shells are not used right away. Instead, they are piled outdoors and left to weather for nearly a year. Sun, rain, wind, and naturally occurring microorganisms gradually break down any remaining organic tissue and eliminate pathogens that may still be present on the shell surface. This step is not about making the shells look clean, it is a mandatory form of biological control. If the shells still carry disease, they can kill oyster larvae as soon as they are introduced into nursery tanks. For that reason, shell curing acts as the first safety filter, ensuring that when life is reintroduced, it is not destroyed at the very first step. After being processed, the oyster shells are not immediately returned to the sea. Instead, they are placed into specialized hatchery tanks where larval seeding begins under tightly controlled conditions. This is a critical stage because in the wild, most oysters do not die from poor growth, they die because they never survive the earliest days of their life cycle. Millions of oyster larvae are pumped into filtered sea water at this stage. They drift freely, so small they are nearly invisible to the naked eye. They do not swim with purpose or actively search for a home. Instead, they move with the currents inside the tanks. Inside their bodies, however, an important biological transition is already underway. The larvae begin developing the ability to sense suitable surfaces for attachment. The decisive moment comes when a larva makes contact with an oyster shell. The calcium carbonate material, rough texture, and microscopic structure of the shell act as biological signals. Once attached, the larva secretes a natural adhesive and becomes permanently fixed. There is no second chance. If a suitable surface is not found within this brief window, the larva dies. From that moment on, the life of a juvenile oyster officially begins. The shell changes roles from an inert material into a living home. A single shell can host dozens of young oysters, turning one unit of material into a tightly packed biological cluster. This concentration creates exponential reproductive efficiency, something that is nearly impossible in degraded natural environments. The tanks continue to maintain gentle water flow, stable temperatures, and adequate oxygen levels so the young oysters can form their first shell. This is the most vulnerable stage in an oyster's entire life cycle. Hatchery rearing is not meant to replace nature, but to help oysters cross this critical survival threshold before they are strong enough to face the harsh conditions of the open water. From that point on, life no longer remains inside tightly controlled hatchery tanks. It has to return to where it belongs, the bottom of Chesapeake Bay. Oyster shells carrying young oysters are loaded onto barges or specialized vessels ready to be transported into the open environment. But returning them to the sea is anything but random. Before a single shell is lowered, the bay floor is carefully surveyed. Water depth, sediment type, and current direction are all analyzed to ensure the young oysters are not buried in oxygen-poor mud or swept away by overly strong currents. At the deployment site, cranes mounted on barges lift each cluster of shells and lower it to precisely mapped coordinates. A deviation of just a few meters can place an entire reef structure into unfavorable conditions. At this stage, the process is no longer purely biological. It becomes a combined challenge of marine engineering, seafloor geography, and the survival needs of living organisms. Restoring oyster reefs, therefore, is not a matter of dropping them in and waiting. It is the deliberate act of placing life in exactly the right location where it finally has a chance to survive and grow in the natural world. As oyster reefs begin to take hold and grow, the most important question is no longer whether they can survive but whether they can truly function as an ecosystem. The answer comes from the field in Maryland. The Harris Creek Restoration Area, one of the flagship projects of the Chesapeake Bay program, was completed after years of monitoring. Surveys show that 98% of the reef area meets or exceeds minimum thresholds for oyster density and biomass, a clear sign that the reefs are not just surviving but operating with real ecological function. When the view expands to the entire bay, the picture becomes even clearer. By 2023, more than 570 acres of oyster reefs had been restored across Chesapeake Bay, an area roughly equivalent to 275 football fields beneath the water surface. In total, 11 tributaries have been included in the restoration effort, with 9 projects completed and 2 more still underway. These numbers show that oyster reef restoration is no longer a series of isolated experiments. It has become a watershed-scale effort, one in which oyster reefs are beginning to reclaim their original role, filtering water, providing habitat, and reconnecting ecological links that were once broken throughout Chesapeake Bay. The ecosystem returns. Once oyster reefs become stable, they trigger a clear chain of biological responses. On the rough surfaces of stacked shells, non-mobile organisms such as barnacles, sponges, and tunicates begin to attach in growing numbers. These species only thrive in environments with sufficient oxygen and stable structure, which is why their presence is often used as an ecological indicator. In restored areas, at the same time, small mobile species start using the reefs as natural shelter. Juvenile fish hide within the gaps between shells to avoid predators and use the structure as spawning grounds. Young blue crabs take refuge inside the reef, where they shelter and molt. At research sites in New York Harbor, scientists have recorded more than 200 different species appearing in and around restored oyster reefs, including blennies, American eels, various crustaceans, and bottom-dwelling organisms. The hard surfaces created by oyster reefs gradually replace oxygen-poor soft mud, forming attachment points, crevices, and three-dimensional habitat directly on the bay floor. However, not every area of Chesapeake Bay has conditions suitable for oyster reefs to naturally recover. In many locations, layers of oxygen-poor soft mud can be tens of centimeters thick, causing oyster shells to become buried after a short time. Under these conditions, restoration projects have to rely on supporting infrastructure, not biology alone. One widely used solution is reef balls, artificial reef structures weighing between 500 kilograms and over 1 metric ton, designed with dozens of holes and channels that allow water to flow through. Their rough surfaces closely mimic the structure preferred by oysters and other bottom-dwelling organisms. In many test sites, reef balls became habitat for juvenile fish, crabs, and sessile organisms within 6 to 12 months, even before oysters appeared in significant numbers. In areas with natural larval supply, these structures are quickly colonized by oysters. In larval poor zones, organizations like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation seed hundreds of thousands of larvae per deployment before placing them in the bay. Post-deployment surveys show that organism density around reef balls can be 3 to 5 times higher than on surrounding bare MUD. At a system level, these structures do not replace oysters. They serve as initial ecological infrastructure, lifting life above the dead mud while the biological system takes years to fully develop. Conclusion: the story of Chesapeake Bay is not a search for a miracle. It is an effort to repair a system that has been broken for far too long. From the disappearance of oyster reefs and the spread of dead zones to humans having to carry each shell back to the seafloor, it all points to one clear reality. Nature only functions properly when its foundational links remain intact. Restoration is neither fast nor guaranteed, but it opens a path for ecosystems to stand back up again, layer by layer, year by year, reef by reef.